Great. Thanks, Joe. Well, let me add my good morning and welcome to this introduction to delivering virtual learning events. We're glad that you're with us this morning. I'm Matt Borg. I'm on the senior leadership team at Actian and Breeio, and we've been in learning and development for about 40 years now. I personally have been working in corporate communication and learning for about 25 years. And so at the beginning of my career, the internet really was just emerging as a tool for organizational communication, both externally and internally. Now, I think we'd all agree that that shift was massive, but it was slow. And we had time to build our skills and our toolkits over a number of years. I think as I've been reflecting on, what we've been through in these last couple of months, this shift has been both massive and rapid. And so it's not really surprising that we're catching up a bit and that we're building new skills rapidly and we're finding new tools. So at Breeio, we're always looking for ways that we can support learning and development professionals with good tools and good advice for making an impact. And so we've asked Jo Cook, who you've met from Lightbulb Moment, to share her insight and expertise this morning. Now, Jo's not a newcomer to the virtual learning sessions. She's been a leading expert in the UK on virtual learning since 2013. She's facilitated well over 1,000 hours of virtual sessions, hundreds of guest speakers, works across all the different platforms. And so Jo is the perfect person to help us this morning to take our first steps into virtual. Can I just say one thing before I hand over to Jo? The content that Jo is presenting is going to be very helpful, but I think what will be just as helpful is watching and learning how Jo runs the session, because in a way we're learning about how to do this well while experience the medium itself. So Jo, thank you so much for being with us this morning and giving us our first steps into virtual.
Well, thank you, Matt. What a lovely introduction from you. Really good to hear all of that background. And also with us today, we have Mike. He is our producer. You've seen him in the chat window. And if you're wondering why we have the same last name, we're brother and sister, and we run Lightbulb Moment together. So let's kind of have a look at, first of all, at the tools that we're using today to make sure that we can communicate with each other. Please make sure that you've got your participant panel open. Look at the bottom of your screen. You might need to wiggle your mouse. Click on the picture of the head icon. And what will happen then is you will open up your participant panel and you can use the icons that we've got there for feedback. And it's basically a really easy way for me to see nodding heads or disagreement. Let's everybody click that green yes tick right now. Let's see if we can get that working. Ah, fantastic. Now, I can see all those green ticks coming up on the participant panel, and you might be able to see some of them as well. So thank you very much for that. Really good practice. And we're going to use that throughout. You're more than welcome to disagree with me at different points as well. This is our agenda today. We're going to look at some definitions of things like live online learning and virtual classroom and what do they actually mean. We're going to talk a bit about your experience you've had live online. And also we've got some survey data to share with you as well. And we're going to make sure that we are talking as well about Breeio and Zoom integration and how that works. And we're going to focus on dealing with remote audiences. All of these different things are what we're focusing on. Please click that green tick if you're thinking, yeah, this looks good. And you can use the chat window if you want to make sure we're covering something specifically. So green tick if you think, yes, this looks good. Or of course, use that chat window if you think, are you going to cover this? And if you want something specific. So loads of you have got those green ticks. That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. So then we are running this as a webinar today. We've got lots and lots of you here, which is absolutely fabulous to have you all here. Obviously, we're not opening up audio for you guys today. but we do have the chat window that we are using instead. So do make sure you've clicked on that chat window. And then what you can do is have the chat there and ask questions at any time that you want to, and we'll try and answer them. So Sue, you've already asked a great question. Are you going to cover the role of the producer? That's not something I'm specifically covering, but Sue, what you're going to see is what Mike, our producer, does today, and he will give you some information in chat as well. And if you have some specific questions, do let us know. And Sally, we've got a really good question there about tool for the next class. And Mike will give you some information that we've got around Teams and whether that's the right thing for you as well. So do keep those questions and those comments coming. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to do today is look at the terms that we're using. So first of all, we need to define, well, what is a webinar? So please type in the chat window, what does a webinar mean? How do you understand a webinar? If you were explaining it, how would you explain it? So what is a webinar, please? Go and type in the chat window. What is a webinar? Oh, now, Sue, you've put virtual classroom. My next question is actually, what is a virtual classroom? So I'm going to say, first of all, it's not a virtual classroom, but it is a virtual seminar or a seminar over the web. It can be more listening and more knowledge sharing, Susan, but sometimes they can be interactive. Linda's saying it's interactive. Sue's put a question mark, I'm not sure now. That's what we're here to learn together. So you're absolutely right. It's all about remote communication. Linda, you've made a point about screen sharing, which you're absolutely spot on with regards to things like Zoom. We do that a lot. We've got Andy says, I think I'd say webinars and virtual training are different. And I agree with that. Andy says, I see webinars more as speeches and virtual training as more workshop. And that's kind of a lot of people's experience. A webinar is lots of people. Now, lots of people could be 30 people, could be 3,000 people. That will depend on the context of what it is that you're delivering. Now, notice here I've put interactive presentation. It is much more broadcast by the very nature of it. It has to be broadcast because there's so many of you here, but it should still be interactive, and I'm hoping you're going to see that today. Karen says in the chat, it's an online session that participants can contribute to, though not active within. Yeah, it depends on kind of what it is that you're doing, about how active it is. So then this brings me on to my next question. What's a virtual classroom? It could be called live online learning. It could be virtual instructor-led learning. You might have different names for it. But what is a virtual classroom? Because it's different from a webinar. So again, in chat, please share, what are your thoughts about what a virtual classroom is? So Andy, you've already answered. You've said how you think they're different. So we've got online training sessions, online workshop with breakout rooms. That's interesting, Margaret. It doesn't have to be with a breakout room, but having the option in the software makes it a good virtual classroom tool. So you make a great point there, Margaret. Thank you. It's facilitated learning. What a great phrase there, Gary, between remote individuals. Thank you. It's small groups. Absolutely. It's group activities. It's not the same as a real classroom. You're absolutely right. It's not the same as what I would call a face-to-face classroom. I think it can still be real because we're real people at a real computer doing real conversations and learning, but it's definitely different from face-to-face. Yes, it's interactive. It can be tailored to small groups. Polly says today's session is a virtual classroom. Polly, I'm going to take that as a really huge compliment. Today's session for me is a webinar, just because there's so many of you here. A virtual classroom for me is actually having a really small group, 8 to 10 people. So this, I'm hoping, is an interactive and engaging webinar. So the facilitation. It's the activities, it's the kind of learning outcomes more focused and tailoring are all really important. And it's a little bit about the platform. So there was that question earlier on about, can we use Teams for virtual classrooms? Well, yeah, you can. You might not have breakout rooms in the traditional way that Zoom or Adobe Connect or WebEx training does, but you can still use it. So there's lots of different elements there. In summary, a webinar is all about large groups of people and what I call broad brushstrokes of interaction. So today, I can't get to know you as individuals. I can't tailor to every single need that you've got. But what I can do is try and focus on you as a whole group and the conversation that we're having. And a virtual classroom, it's much more about those individual learning points with those small groups. So as I say, at Lightbulb Moment, we limit our virtual classrooms to 10 people so we can really get to know people, really tailor to their learning needs. So let's have a look at your experience. Now we've made those definitions. So look at your participant panel and you've got a hand up, a raise hand icon. Put your hand up if you've ever delivered a webinar or virtual classroom session. So if you've ever delivered a webinar or virtual classroom session, just click that hand up. Let's see how many of you have. So some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying no. You can use the green tick and red X if you want to. That's fine too. Lots and lots of hand ups, about half of you, I'd say, and a few of you saying no, you haven't, but that's why you're here today, to learn some of these different things. So thank you very much. And lots of you have done that. Now, if you have done that, yeah, informal 2 to 3 people, that counts, absolutely. So if you have done that, if you've had a good experience, please put in the chat window one word that describes why. How come you had a good experience? So if you have had a good experience delivering a webinar or a virtual classroom, please type in the chat window just one word that explains why you had a good experience. Oh, lots of good stuff. Now, Rich has still got no sound. It is frustrating for Rich. I'm sure Mike is working on that in the background. So why was there a good experience? People were experienced. It was interactive. There was participation. People were prepared. It was novel. There was engagement. People rehearsed. Participative. It was interactive. It was fun, says Gail. Oh, Gail, I love that you've used that word. It was useful and there was feedback. It was great content and interaction. So I think you've got some really good things here that you can see all of these different things about why they are so important, that preparation and that interactiveness, that engagement. But what if you've had a poor experience? What about then? So if you've had a poor experience in delivering a webinar or a virtual classroom, can you put one word in the chat that tells us why? And you could imply this actually if to attending as well if you wanted to. What's been the problem? People were bored. The tech was a problem. They were dull. Connectivity issues. Tech. Okay, I'm getting the theme that tech was a problem. We've got connectivity again. Confidence, Chloe. That's a one we hear a lot, that people aren't confident with the tech, with dealing with IT issues, with their skills and so on. A lot of things were boring. Oh, that's awful. I've logged into so many webinars going, this will be interesting. And within a few minutes, it's like, oh, it's on my second screen and I'm in my email. Ravimbo makes a great point about having just too much information can be a problem. And I do that all the time. I'm forever cutting material out of my webinars and virtual classrooms. And Matt and I are going to talk about the blend later on and how important that is. Shrina, you make a great point here. There's no good takeaways. Something that you can go and look up is Action Mapping by Kathy Moore. And she really focuses on what is it that people are going to do after your learning intervention. So that's a really great thing to have a focus on. And V says they can be dry. V, can you tell us more about them being dry? I'm assuming that's kind of monotone delivery. There's no life, energy, and passion. Maybe there's no humor, things like that. Okay. Oh, and unable to see and use the physical behavior cues. That's a real kind of challenge. Okay. So we've got lots of challenges here. And you're absolutely right about all of those. And monotone and no interaction V, that's what you're highlighting about it being dry. Thank you. So we know there can be challenges, even though we also know they can be really good. So there was the Emerald Works health check, and in the health check, I think it was earlier this year, over 1,100 organisations took part in this. And there was a report released back in February called Back to the Future, which I like not just because of the name of the film, but the whole point of it is about looking back and also making sure that we're focusing moving forward. It was action mapping by Kathy Moore is what I mentioned. And if you just go and Google Kathy Moore, M-O-O-R-E, you should be able to go and find her website. And what we found is that actually 91% of the organisations in the Emerald Works health check said that live online, so virtual classrooms and webinar delivery is a priority this year in 2020. Green tick, those of you that are kind of thinking, yeah, that is a priority skill development for me at the moment. So use that green tick or the red X. Is that a priority for you or your team or your organization at the moment? So Emerald Works Health Check is saying, well, actually 91% of L&D leaders are saying virtual classroom and webinar delivery is a priority. What about for you? Green tick or red X on that participant panel. So all I'm seeing are green ticks. About kind of half of you are saying it's a priority at the moment. Nobody is saying it isn't. Now you are a captive audience on a webinar about this skill. So I would perhaps expect that you are saying this. But since the coronavirus epidemic, it's changed the way we're working and learning at the moment. Ahead of the webinar today, we asked those of you that had registered if you felt your organisation was prepared to deliver training virtually before the COVID-19 outbreak. And 39% of you said you were, but obviously the rest of you weren't. And this is certainly in line with some of the discussions I've been having with my clients and the unusual circumstances we're in at the moment. What we also asked you in that survey is whether your organisations are delivering training virtually directly because of COVID-19. And a whopping 84% of you said, yes, we are. So I've got a question. For those of you that are in that yes, in that 84%, why have you gone live online? So in that chat window, for those of you that are doing more training live online because of COVID-19, why are you doing that live online? So it might seem obvious, like, well, we can't see people, so we've got to do something. But actually, there's usually more nuance to it. So we've got no other choice. We're unable to train face-to-face. We can't travel to the countries that we normally work in. We want to reach out to people. We need to provide a service that would usually be face-to-face. There's compliance training requirements. Yeah, that doesn't stop. We've got budget cuts. We've got apprentices who are still able to learn remotely. Oh gosh, the chat's running really fast. We need to upskill very quickly. That's a common one. Blended learning, not only e-learning, says Arthur, thank you. And that's going to come up again in a moment. We don't want to stop our graduate training program. We don't want people to feel abandoned. We want to increase our online learning. We want people to keep engaged even though they're furloughed, so they're not quite working at the moment. Laura says, we ran webinars anyway as part of our training program, but we need to run them in lieu of original planned seminars. We're unable to use the facilities with social distancing. We've got corporate inductions, mostly for safety, says Anne-Marie, but also to extend the client base. We've also got, Gail is saying training is part of our core business. Lee is saying diversify. So it's, we might not have done online stuff originally, but actually what we need to do is make sure that our business keeps running. And Dorcas says COVID-19 actually helped us speed up to digital learning. There's a really funny meme I've seen on Facebook where it says, what has helped you go into digital work and digital learning? Was it the CEO? Was it the CFO? Or was it COVID-19? So you're kind of really highlighting that, Dorcas. And Chloe saying similar, it's something we always wanted to do, but this just highlighted the need. And Veal says it's a good opportunity to change our training approach. So yes, there's a huge need for, well, actually we have to, but there are other nuances in there as well. And Susan says, we've been surprised at the positive reception from delegates. Susan, if I could give you a high five, I would. That's pretty awesome. Now, there's a flip side of this as well, which is some of people are saying, well, no, we're not delivering more through virtual classrooms or through webinars. So if you haven't delivered more virtually, in chat, please, what have been the barriers or maybe the reasons that you haven't done that? What have been the barriers or the reasons? And it could be maybe you've done some delivery, but not everything. So it might not be a complete yes or no. But if for some reason on all of your courses or some of your courses, you haven't turned them virtual, what have been the barriers? Or what have been the very good reasons that you haven't done that? Judy says acceptance by clients is not 100% yet. Yeah, and for some clients, they might be like, well, let's just hold on and see how things go, or it might not feel right for some reason. There's been resistance by central HR. There's been a lack of resources, limited knowledge and confidence. Employees at home don't have enough tech. We haven't started yet as we haven't got the resources to do so. And we're currently looking at Adobe Connect as our trainers are currently on furlough. Chloe, Adobe Connect is really awesome for really great virtual classrooms. Zoom is good too, but Adobe Connect in another level. There's resistance from organizations and people. We've got to spend time converting it. Do we have the design skills? Technology and access is a barrier as well. The materials aren't ready. Client focus isn't there, but it's about surviving in their market. There's a lack of knowledge. All sorts of different things. You've got loads of amazing things in the chat here. I can't possibly read out every single one, but there's some very good reasons not to go live online. And if it's not the right thing to do or not the right time, then that's absolutely fine too. One of the challenges organizations have been having during COVID-19 is rapidly changing their face-to-face to live online events. As an example, one client we had an all-day training schedule and had an all-day training scheduled and had to move that from the face-to-face into live online, a whole day. Do you think it's good practice to run a live online event all day, 9 to 5? Give us a tick or a cross in that participant channel or in chat. Ravimbo was very quick and put no, as did Anne-Marie. Okay, so in chat or green tick or red cross. Susan saying no, you should break it up. But Bev is saying this is the situation I have coming up. Polly says it depends on the audience. Yeah, depends is always a great answer, and it's my favorite one. You're absolutely right. Normally, we would never, ever recommend you do it this way. But sometimes there are extenuating circumstances that dictate otherwise. This company in particular was running the type of training that was court mandated, like a speed awareness course, but it was actually for doctors. There was very little choice but to move ahead. And this is where the systems around learning intervention can either help or hinder at these points when we need to do that rapid development. Matt, can I get you back on audio? And can you tell us a little bit about how the Breeio learning management system can help in just this situation?
Yeah, sure, Joe. Yeah, as we've been talking about, one of the challenges in big shifts like this is that you tend to get a proliferation of different systems, different tools, different platforms. And so you end up managing lots of different tools and platforms and trying to get your people here and there. So what we've tried to do is just try to make that really simple for our customers within Breeio. So if I'm running a classroom event and it's scheduled and I've got people booked onto it, I can just switch that over to a webinar or to Zoom. And then Breeio will automatically contact Zoom and create an event, and everyone will receive an invitation and a link, and the delegates will have on their dashboard the details of how to join, so that just one click they'll be joining the event. They'll be passing then their details over to Zoom so that we know who's attended. And at the end of the event, all of that will be recorded and attendance is recorded. So if you're dealing, for example, with compliance, all of those things are captured just like your other e-learning or face-to-face learning. And you can involve internal trainers, but also external trainers can come and use this tool. So if you've got other people from outside the organization delivering virtual learning for you, they can have access to this sort of tool and run those sessions and also manage the attendance for you. So just trying to make it simpler.
Matt, for me, this is about kind of the blend. Let's have a chat. Let's put our webcams on. How important is kind of the blend and the whole thing to the clients that you've been working with at Action?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. What we would say is that the virtual session is just part of a blend. So here on this screen, we've got an example of a medication course, which might involve some e-learning that would be before the virtual event, and then maybe an assessment that follows. It could be an observation that needs to happen from the manager. So blend is really important. It's not just a one-off silver bullet that's going to save the day.
Yeah. Oh gosh, how we wish we had those silver bullets. Because you're saying here that you'd have something before, you'd have something after. Would that be around maybe just like one learning intervention, or do you run things over a longer period of time maybe?
Yeah, it could be both. So there could be that you're focusing on one particular thing and you're going to blend multiple elements, kind of like we've described here on medications. But it might be that you're running a longer time-based campaign. So there's an e-learning component that might have a virtual session in it, but there might be other things that happen a month from now or 2 months from now, nudges along the way that help me change my behavior. So that could be part of a longer kind of protracted campaign.
Yeah, I love that term nudges as well. It's those little emails or those little notifications in Breeio coming up to say, do this course, do this reminder. And Gary in chat is saying in the main, we use pre-work, reading and surveys, which is all really good. And what about doing this, Matt, in terms of, the skills that you need for the blend and that longer kind of campaign?
Yeah, I think we need to be kind to ourselves and recognize that this shift has been rapid and has been big for many people. And so we're going to be learning and we're going to be improving over time. And because not everything needs to rest on that virtual session, go ahead and add it, get it in there, start using it, knowing that you're going to learn and improve over time.
Love that, Matt. Thank you very much. We'll come back and have a bit more of a chat with you later on. And in the chat window, Jay says, we have pre-work and a forum discussions to encourage interaction before the live sessions, and maybe a case study that can form part of the live session. Loving the forum, and Gary's agreeing with that too, because it can really get people kind of engaged and involved in the conversation and those learning points, and learn from each other, which is really important. So that last point from Matt brings me to the skills of the facilitator. And we find that face-to-face trainers can be very apprehensive when focusing on developing their skills for webinars and for virtual classrooms, as they sometimes feel that, quite frankly, they have to start all over again at the bottom. Do you feel that way, like you are completely out of your comfort zone with regards to live online learning? How about a green tick or a red X? Do you feel kind of out of your comfort zone, almost like you've got to start your skills again when you're thinking about facilitating or training in live online? So green tick if you're thinking, yep, I feel like I'm starting over. Or red X if you think, actually, no, I've got skills and I'm using them. So some of you are saying yes, and there's lots and lots of green ticks. And some of you are saying, well, actually, not completely. There's actually much more prep and so on. And so yeah, lots of you saying not completely and no. So it's a real balance between you. And I think this is kind of highlighted really nicely in the pre-survey questions that we asked. In that survey, the pre-webinar survey, we asked how prepared you were feeling to deliver live online sessions, and there was quite a broad range of answers. And as Sue says, some of those skills are transferable, absolutely. Some of you are feeling prepared, which is a great sign. For all of you, especially those of you feeling like you aren't ready at all, in our virtual classroom facilitation course, one of the very first things that we address is this exact issue. And what we end up with is people actually realizing that their classroom skills are really important live online. We just need to layer new skills on top. A good maxim to start with, says ITDA, is to start with the end in mind. Be clear about what you're trying to achieve in an online session. Absolutely. Laura says, in a way, it takes the pressure off if you're not on webcam, because you can glance at your notes, so you don't feel so much pressure to remember everything. Laura, you are spot on about that. It can help people in that way. And you're also right, everybody, where you're saying, you need to practice, and actually there's a lot more preparation as well involved, especially when you're a little bit newer to this. We also asked you what would improve your ability to make the most out of the virtual classroom. And the top answer here was understanding more about running engaging sessions, as well as how to use the technology. They go hand in hand, so I'm really not surprised at those answers. In the chat window, what makes a great, engaging virtual classroom session? In other words, what does good look like for the virtual classroom? What does good look like for the virtual classroom? And you've made some great points before this as well about prep. Make sure your personality comes through. You might feel more exposed online because of your knowledge. So what does good look like? Interaction, relax, thank you for the compliments, in feeling involved, varied, being relaxed, bringing personality, have buy-in from learners, involving everyone, considering balance. Laura, I'm not sure what the balance between things are. Facilitation skills, fun, energy, change of pace, laughter, voice, passion, knowledge, somebody who's keen to find out what everyone needs and includes everyone. And a small number of people, especially in a virtual classroom, pre-course survey, assessments, changing the flow and the topic is really important to keep people kind of focused and involved. And Laura says balance between enough information and being mindful of the medium it's being delivered through. And she said, I should take my own advice. Oh, Laura, we should all take our own advice. The world would be a much better place. And Caroline adds, I like the idea of using voting and chat as a key part, but it takes a lot to review all aspects. Caroline, it does. I remember in my teacher training, a book, I think it was by Geoffrey Petty, and it said something like the average GCSE kind of a exam in the UK for kind of 16-year-olds, the average GCSE textbook can be read aloud in 20 hours, but the average GCSE sessions and teaching classes is actually 200 hours. So that really highlights that difference and how important it is to have that engagement and that involvement. We're going to run another webinar to focus on this point number 1 about design elements and all of the stuff that goes about running an engaging session. At the end of today's webinar, I'll give you resources and a survey link. If you fill that in and make sure you tick, yes, please let me know, and please keep in touch, we'll let you know when we run that webinar. We'd love to have you back and continue this conversation. One of the biggest issues people come up against when they're thinking about delivering live online is that they can't see people. They can't feed off their energy. And it can feel like you're just talking at a computer screen. And some of you have said in the chat earlier on, you know, it's a long time to go without body language, without being able to see some of those things from people. And we need to make sure that whilst people might be geographically remote from us, we don't want them to be distant in terms of learning, collaboration, and conversation. I mentioned earlier on about these feedback icons. This is a screen grab from Adobe Connect, and we're in Zoom today. Now, we've used the green tick and the red X a few times and the hand up. How have we been using emoticons in this webinar? So tell me about how we've been using emoticons in this webinar. You've done it a few times, had a few different questions. How have we been using emoticons in this webinar? And what did you like or dislike about them? So we've used them for voting. We've used the green tick. We've maintained engagement. We've used it for closed yes or no questions to gain agreement, to get an understanding of what people think. They are quick answers. Good point, Chloe, it is quick. It drives interaction, and I liked it a lot. Immediate feedback, it's check-ins, it's in a paced way. Just as a mind could wander, they bring us back in. It gives everyone a voice, it gauges engagement, we have feedback, it keeps people involved. All of these great things you're saying in chat, it puts your thoughts across, and we can use it for assessment. Chloe says people may not feel confident in chat, so it's a great resource, absolutely. So all of these are really easy to use. And it's a great way to start understanding a little bit more from people and where you should go with your conversations. The key point is to react to things. So earlier on, I asked a question about, you know, are you all kind of feeling completely new and like you're starting at the beginning of your skills? I'd expected about 2/3 of you to click yes, but actually it was about half of you clicked yes and half of you clicked no. So that changed what I said and the conversation. What about chat? We've used that lots today too. Again, this is an Adobe Connect screen grab just to show you something a bit different whilst you're here today. What have you liked about having chat in the webinar? What have you liked about chat in the webinar? So what have you liked about chat in our webinar today? Reading others' comments and building on them, quick responses, easy to use, able to see everyone's responses, hearing what others have to share. I have a voice, I feel involved, getting hints from people, attention from the facilitator to the responses. Everyone can contribute, sharing experience and knowledge, bringing us together, instant communication. Different opinions is always really important, Shrina, sorry. Reading them out as you have done, I personally feel a part of the session, says Anne-Marie, demonstrating that we're being listened to. Jay says, I'm more likely to type in chat than speak in a busy classroom. And that's an excellent point, whether it's a webinar or a virtual classroom. Expressing opinions, it's easier if you have a moderator or helper to manage and respond. You're right, especially on a busy webinar like we have today. I've allocated time to look at this. To this chat, but not everything I can allocate time to. So I do have Mike, that we have a little back channel, we've got a little private chat, and every now and then he pastes something to me that maybe I've missed a question or I've missed a really good comment, and he pastes it to me and so I can read it out. So he's helping me behind the scenes. So it is all about conversation. Now, Dorcas, you say too many messages at the same time is a bit overwhelming. And you're absolutely right. It's overwhelming for me as a facilitator sometimes. But that's why we have to plan in the time to allocate to it, as well as having someone like Mike to help with that. And that's why I'm kind of summarizing some of what you say. This is a busy webinar. It's very different on a virtual classroom with 10 people. And you're right, Louise, it's good to be able to contribute, but with 90 participants, it can be distracting. So it's having that balance, and it's partly about you deciding how you want to work in the session as well. It's a great way, as you've said, to share ideas and thoughts and comments. You can ask me questions, and to each other as well. Some of you might have private messaged Mike, and the producer can help you with those things that you need. We've used it to share hyperlinks at the beginning. We'll share some more at the end. And in a virtual classroom, it can be a really rich way to make sure that you're getting understanding from the individuals, that you know they've got something, you know they've learned something. Those responses in the chat window will tell you whether they understand or they get the topic or not, and allow you to train and tailor to their needs. In our live online sessions, it's imperative to interact and engage with your audience. You can do this through the chat window, poll questions, asking and answering questions, allowing time for those conversations, using breakouts, using whiteboards, having video on. All of this helps me to see people. It helps me get over that issue of talking at a computer screen. If they're excitedly adding information in chat like you guys are when I ask you questions, that makes me feel amazing. I've got loads of energy coming off of you. And also then I can make inferences, I can make interpretations about what you think. And this is a huge area for creativity in your design and to make your delivery fun. So speaking of design, Matt, I want to come back to you, because what we know is that actually the learning activities we have are really important, and also the platforms like, like Zoom to a certain extent. When you think about the trainers acting on and how you're responding to those needs, how are you dealing with clients in order to achieve everything that we've been talking about here?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I think sticking to the fundamentals, somebody mentioned earlier, starting with the end in mind is really important. So one of our fundamentals is always starting with what's the aim? What difference are we trying to make with this intervention? We might ask questions like, what metrics would we expect to move if we get this right? And that just kind of focuses our mind on the instructional design process. And then we come into the design, which I think because we've got that aim defined, it unlocks some fresh thinking, and you're able to say, okay, what methods are really going to help me meet that aim? And so making the transfer from physical face-to-face to virtual, we might be asking questions like, okay, what works well in the classroom, in an environment we're all familiar with? How might we be able to replicate that online? So transferring, we've got an example of a leadership training course that used to be physical. This is a global pharmaceutical company. The leadership training, they used to pair off and have conversations and then come back and debrief. We've recreated that online in virtual. They go into breakout or they go audio, and they actually go on a walk, but then they come back into the virtual session and share that with the rest of the group. So trying to bring some of those other activities into the virtual.
I really like that you say that people go for an actual walk whilst talking and then come back to the virtual. It's like we don't have to be sat at our computers, do we?
No, it seems radical, but it works. But also, what methods are only available in virtual? I mean, some of the things that we've seen today, the chat and your use of the chat, that's sometimes very difficult to get all of that input in a physical environment. It would take much longer to gather the sort of feedback that you've gathered. We've got access to tools like polls and quizzes maybe that we could bring in that would be much more difficult to have in the physical environment. So it's thinking about those methods. And then, as we talked about before, how is this part of a larger campaign for change, or how is this blended with pre-surveys like we use today, post surveys, post assessments, maybe an observation that a manager does. How do all those things come together to achieve the aim?
Fantastic. We're gonna dive into this more in another webinar, aren't we, Matt?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, you make some great points there. Thank you very much. And this kind of brings me towards the conversation closing today. So one of the questions that we asked you was whether you thought virtual learning events will become the new normal. And I think this was a fairly resounding yes on this question. Now, in the chat window, please, tell us more about your thoughts, whether you're a yes or a no. Tell us why. What are you thinking? Do you think virtual learning events will be the new normal after the kind of the global issues we're dealing with at the moment? Or do you think things will go kind of back to where they were before, or something else? So let us know in the chat window, what are your thoughts about whether virtual learning will become the new normal? Why do you think what you think? So a few of you saying yes. More clients will be prepared to take virtual training seriously. That's definitely what we're finding. It won't replace face-to-face, but it will increase the reach. There is room to embrace this more. People don't have the technology before, might have it now. It will become more common, but it won't totally replace. And Bev, it shouldn't totally replace face-to-face, should it? You're absolutely right. Necessity means that we'll have more of this. It will be a blend of face-to-face and virtual depending upon the learning goal. Yes and no. Yeah, there's always that depends answer. Depends on the timeline. We can reach out to more of our colleagues, even those working remotely. Organisations have proved they can deliver business as usual whilst working from home and social distancing, and that will drive this need further. I love that point, thank you. Virtual learning will become more integrated into what we're doing. It's made us realize that we need to get creative with the way that we do everything. People are less resistant as we had to embrace change. That's all good. Not all training can be this way. You're absolutely right. It can't all be this way. Practical skills like gardening are as an example. There's often an online component. We all learn so much from YouTube or Facebook groups or whatever it might be. But you're right. There's always going to be a practical element. And this should not replace face-to-face. It's an adjunct, it's an add-on, and it's about finding the right solution for the job. It will be easier to access. We can bring more people together without travel and the lower costs. It brings out the best in trainers, says Sally Ann. I'm really liking that point. It depends on the training need, and managers take up, says Polly, have improved already on training interventions that were delivered face to face. So that's all really interesting stuff. And it leads me to kind of think, from this, with all those points in mind, what are the opportunities for live online sessions in your organisation? So it may or may not be the new normal. It may be a blend, as Walkira has said, that sums it up perfectly. But what opportunities are you seeing in your organisation? So we've had a really kind of, I think, and I hope, robust conversation about this today. What opportunities are you seeing? Heaps. Virtual onboarding. Yes, there's been a lot of virtual onboarding recently. It's useful and inevitable, but sad that it limits humans from really meeting each other. And Susan met her partner on a work training course. Oh, Susan, that's an amazing story. And you still will be able to meet people in the future. At the moment, we've got some exceptional circumstances. And again, it's about part of, where do the face-to-face parts sit? Where do the online parts sit? What about e-learning? What about all the other parts of the blend that Matt has talked about? Organisations need to review their tech. Can it be supported? Many of our locations have terrible Wi-Fi. Yes, Caroline, that is a real challenge for this way forwards. It's a revolution, says Louise. Ian says greater reach. We have access to a wider audience. All these amazing opportunities. And Karen says it's a necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? Catherine says it's engaging people who don't enjoy classroom learning. I like that point, Catherine, because a lot of people behave differently online in a webinar or a virtual classroom. The person that's shy and doesn't want to speak up might just use that chat window more than they would do, because we're not talking over each other. It's quite a leveler to be in a virtual classroom sometimes. The best opportunity is that scheduling is easier because they haven't got an excuse anymore. They're going nowhere, absolutely. We can use this tool to build theory before the practical face-to-face session. Another great point. And again, it's about the blend. It's about, where is this the right solution? It's not the right solution for everything. There was a session that I'm delivering later on this month, and I was thinking, well, which tool should I use? Which platform? Should it be Zoom? And that's pretty easy and everyone can use it. Should it be Adobe Connect, which has got a lot more features, but I'm going to have to teach people how to do some specific things. And in the end, I just went, you know what, just keep it simple and keep it practical and kind of do that. And that's really important, to keep those things in mind. Delia says to explore the opportunities we would not have considered previously. And I think if we focus on the business, the work and the learning part of the current situation we have in 2020 globally, I'm really hoping that this is going to bring out some positive changes in how we learn and how we work. And V says it's access to learning when it's needed. It's good for dispersed teams. There are pros and cons, absolutely. It's great to increase skills, but not so good as the loss of body language will be missed. I think you've got a really important point about body language. We haven't focused on it so much today, but I do some writing on what I call digital body language. Mike will share a link to our blog about it, and also it's in the resources later. You can go and have a look at it. It's about kind of deconstructing, well, how do we normally do things face to face? And therefore, how can we do things virtually and online? It's not the same, but you can do an awful lot live online that a lot of people don't realize about. Amazing comments. Thank you very much for all of those kind of points there. Some lovely opportunities coming forwards. And Caroline says, it's interesting that you did it without cameras on. Many have them on and that can be distracting and also stressful, seeing myself, as I'm not usually seeing myself on calls. And I feel the same. I don't want to see myself either on a call. And it's about having it on where I think it makes a difference. We switched the cameras on where Matt and I were having a conversation, and I switched the camera on for an introduction. But otherwise, you know, do I focus on the slides or the camera or the busy chat? I didn't want to distract you too much. And that's why it was judicial use of the webcam. So let's have a look at a summary of just a few of the things that we've been through. We defined a webinar as for lots of people like today. A virtual classroom for up to 10 people, really facilitated. Both can be interactive, fun and engaging, but they are different. Webinars and virtual classrooms are a priority for many, yet we don't always have the skills. We can get over not seeing people and using digital body language and have creative activities in our platform. And there are lots of opportunities for your organisation to go and explore and make it right for you. Now, I have a few moments left in the session for any questions that you might have. Coming up, I've got some resources for you. I've got a question to finish off the webinar. But what questions do you have right now that we can help you with? So I've still got 2 more things to do before we wrap up. But are there any questions that you want to ask that maybe I've missed throughout the session or anything like that? We've got a minute or 2 to do that. Caroline says, what is the one thing we should do above all else? Caroline, it is practice your technology. If you don't know how to use it, then you can't design for it, you won't facilitate with it confidently. You may or may not have noticed at the beginning of the session, the slides went a bit funky and they went away. It's because I realized there was a problem I'd basically caused myself. And whilst Matt was doing his introduction, I stopped the sharing, fixed the problem, started sharing again. If I wasn't confident in my tools, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Karen says, you mentioned that you have a producer helping you. Yep, that's Mike. How many monitors are you working with to keep up with the information flow? I'm just using one monitor, Karen, but I'll be honest, it's a gigantic monitor. And on that, I've got my slides in a window. I've got my facilitator guide on one side of the screen. I've got chat in the middle of the screen where I'm focusing on. And Mike and I are using Skype as a private messaging for him to mention things to me. But if you've got two monitors, you know, the more monitor real estate you can get if you're doing this, the better. Any other questions? Nikki says, you mentioned a webinar on facilitating online. Could you please send through that information? Absolutely, we can do that. So the way to do that is to go and have a look at this link that Mike is going to share in the chat with you. So we've got loads of resources that you can go and have a look at from the topic today. If you complete that follow-up survey and tick the kind of yes, please contact me, we will let you know about that next webinar. So that's the thing to go and follow up on, is click on that survey. So we'll look at planning that webinar in the future. And also we want to share as well the survey results with you. Polly says, what's your background? I'm assuming you mean kind of my work and career background to bring me to this point. When I was 19, I studied as a journalist. I then moved into training, so I taught further and higher education. I did teach some kind of slightly technical topics like website design, but then I moved into more corporate training, and eventually 7 years ago, I decided live online was for me. I realized it was amazing, started my own company, and 7 years later, through the magic of career and time, here I am. Chloe says, are you doing this webinar again? We're not sure about that, Chloe. That's a good question. We will have the recording available on YouTube. And so you can, you'll get the link in an email later, so you can go and share that with your staff if you want to. So let's have a reflection. I'd like to know from you, please, what is your light bulb moment from today? And thank you, Sally. So Polly, if you click on the link that Mike pasted in chat, if you go and copy that and paste it into your browser, then you'll have links to my website and blog and stuff like that. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. So what is your light bulb moment from today? So it's top of mind. What's like a learning nugget you're taking away with you? Chat and voting, use of the Zoom facilities, the link, Mike, can you perhaps go and pop that link into a browser and get like a proper URL for it and see if that works a little bit better. Blended learning, pre-session activities are important. Immediate interactivity using chat and emoticons. Karen, that is amazing to take away. It's a really important point. Love that you've said that. Plan in more interactivity in my webinars. Yep, if you look at the resources that we've shared, that will take you to all of my stuff, and I've got all sorts of things to help you with that. A producer for a webinar, the use of chat. It can be done, you're right. Virtual is the way forward. To be yourself, yep, you can't be anyone else. The difference between the webinar and the virtual classroom. A light bulb moment for me was having such a great example of how to do a webinar. Thank you, Sally Ann. Finding your own style, that digital body language is a thing. The importance of interaction and using all the functions. You say all the functions, Laura. I haven't even used a poll today, so that's interesting. But yeah, it was a really important point. This session shows it can work really well. The slides are fab, the action mapping, explaining the difference between the webinar and the virtual classroom, that's really important. Practicing the tech, the confidence in the skills, and all sorts of different things. And Michelle, I love that point. I'm on the right track and a massive confidence booster. I think that's the point at which we need to end this session on such a high. Thank you so much, everybody. You've been amazing in the chat window and with the emoticons. Thank you to Matt and everybody else at Action who has been here and in the session today. And also thank you to Mike, who has been my producer. So on behalf of Action and Lightbulb Moment, thank you so much for your interaction, and we hope to see you soon.